This is a little bit shorter today, but we'll make them. It must have scared them all off. Like dreams and visions scared everybody off from that. I don't know. It's a frightening topic. And I don't have a list of particular announcements tonight to bring up, so I'm open to any input that you guys recall from the prayer list or anything you want to bring up with regards to people we should particularly be praying for. Any thoughts? Just refer to it then. All right, if you bow with me. Most glorious Heavenly Father, we're always again grateful for the opportunity to get together, to study your word, to find more in it that we can apply to our lives, more that we can learn about you and your characteristics. And we hope that we can find a lot of that in the various ways that you communicated through dreams and visions to those that we find in the Testaments. We ask you to be with us as we study. We ask you to be with the many that can't be with us tonight. We know that there are many on our prayer list. We pray for all of those that their situations might be improved and their health returned and they're back to their quality of life and to their events and activities. And we certainly want to see them here with us, that we might be edifying to one another. We ask you to be with those that are suffering from losses, and difficulties, and challenges. And we ask that you be with your church around the world, particularly your missionaries. Keep them strong, keep them safe, healthy, and give them success. We ask you to be with governments that allow for that to happen. And we ask always for your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we are still studying, only the second week, so we better be still doing it. Dreams and visions. So let's summarize a little bit about what we talked about last week. We introduced the topic last week, and we said that was God's common way of communicating before we had a written word. When he wanted to talk to people, sometimes he did choose to just speak out to people, like he did to Moses, who heard more from God than probably any man otherwise, directly from God, by far. But most of the time with other people, both believers and non-believers, he chose the way of communication to be either dreams or visions from that. And we talked about dreams are what happen, like they do for you when you're asleep. And they occur that way. Whereas visions are occurring when you're actually awake and about and you see something that's not necessarily there, but it's like a dream from that aspect. We also mentioned that the majority of dreams that we find in the Bible, interestingly enough, are experienced by non-believers. There is an impact, obviously, one way or the other on those who believe in God, but they are actually dreamt by those that are not necessarily believers in God from that. We said that most of those dreams also addressed future events. They had that prophesying kind of thing, where we're learning about something that's going to happen to that person or to the kingdom or whomever might be addressed by that type of dream. On the other hand, all the visions that we find are pretty much all experienced by who we put in the quotations God's people, whether that's Hebrews, before Hebrews were around, before they were actually Israelites, or whether that moves all the way up into the New Testament and those that were in the Christian age as it kind of carried up into that time period. All those are pretty much done by or experienced by God's people. And the purposes for vision is more varied than it was for dreams. They might have other topics other than just future events. They might be an encouragement for something. It might be identifying a change in God's doctrine in some way, like Peter with the vision of the sheet coming down and moving from having unclean and clean animals to everything being allowed to be eaten from that. So more visions of different types from that. We went and looked at one dream last time, because we're starting with dreams. We looked at Abimelech's dream. He was a king in the area that we would know as the Promised Land, as Canaan. But when we first got to that situation with Abraham, when he was sent there, and he went to visit and was told that he was going to inherit that, but he had no real ownership there at all. And Abimelech was one of the powerful kings of the time. And so Abraham and Sarah both chose together to lie about their relationship. So instead of saying we are husband and wife, they told Abimelech and anybody else that asked about it, hey, we're brothers and sister, brother and sister here. That's what we are. And so that was the situation. That's what led into the dream. And the dreamer was the king of that land there, Abimelech. he had the dream. And it's an interesting dream in that it is primarily just a dialogue, like it would have happened without being a dream, between Abimelech, his consciousness, and God. And God said, you're a dead man because of sin. And because you're with that woman, and Abimelech quickly defends himself in his own dream. He's very good at that, apparently. Can defend himself in a dream. I have troubles defending myself when I'm not dreaming. But he did a good job in his dream. And he said, now, we're going to punish a righteous nation, because he knew that even if he was wiped out, that would affect all the people there. And he pointed out, I have not done anything with Sarah. All I did was take her. She's now, in with my household, but I haven't had any relationship with her at all. So, are you going to punish me for that? And I didn't know. They said they were brother and sister, and God indicates now, well, they're husband and wife from that. And so they have that little dialogue involving sin and the repercussions of that. And Abimelech says, I didn't sin, and God says, I didn't let you sin. That's how that worked. I was a part of that. I prevented you from going too far with that because it really wasn't fair in a lot of ways to you. As a result of that, Abraham is asked by Abimelech, why did you put me and my kingdom into jeopardy? Why did you put us on the wrong side of your God, the God of Israel? How dare you do that? How did I offend you to make me in such peril as this? And Abraham says, I lied basically for the selfishness. I was afraid for my own life. It was all about me. That's why we lied. I told Sarah to lie and to tell you that. But by the way, it wasn't a complete lie, Abimelech. We weren't just making something up. She actually is my half-sister. All right? We have different mothers, but the same father, and so we are brother and sister, just not full brother and sister, but we're also more than that, by the way. Yeah, we are husband and wife, and that's what's really going to be impacted by you taking my wife from me from that. And as a result of that, Abimelech is told to ask for Abraham to pray for him. He also does a backhanded rebuke of Sarah when he reverts back to saying, your brother is restored to you. Oh yeah, I know he's not completely just your brother. And then Abraham prays for him. And that's necessary because not only is there something hanging over their heads, but everybody in the household that's female is not able to have children at this point because of that near sin, if you will. And so Abraham prayed for Abimelech and his household, and God allowed all that to pass and give forgiveness from that. And Abimelech gave a whole bunch of stuff to Abraham as kind of a, I'm sorry, even though it's not my fault, kind of rewarding of stuff from that. So we talked about that particular one. Any other comments about what we studied last week? All right. We did touch very beginning, first set of verses on Jacob's dream from that in Genesis chapter 31. We read this one in Genesis 31, first 3 verses. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son. Now remember, Laban is his father-in-law. Laban is also his uncle, right? He's Rebekah's brother. Remember when Isaac sends his servant to go get a wife for him? Well, not sends a servant for him. When he goes to get a wife, rather, because he has to run from his brother Esau, and his mother says, go back and get a wife, and he meets up with Rachel, and he wants to marry her from that, and he goes into Laban's family, and we'll talk more about that relationship with Laban. But now he's been there a while, and he's got family and all that, and he's been working for Laban, and now his sons say, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has acquired all this wealth. And as we talked about last week, they're probably not that worried about their father. Let's be honest, they're worried about their inheritance. It isn't dad's stuff that we don't have anymore. Jacob's got dad's stuff. It's dad's stuff that's going to be our stuff. It should be our stuff because we're the males. We would inherit that. So at worst case, the best case here, our sister's got what we should have. Worst case, this interloper has come here and he's got all of dad's riches and we're not going to get those. And Jacob then goes on, and Jacob saw the countenance of Laban. He saw how they interacted, how Laban looked at him and talked to him and those things, and he indeed found it was not favorable toward him as before. He's starting to show a little bit of agitation. You're building up your wealth. I'm not. That doesn't make me feel good. You're doing it on me as far as I'm concerned from that. And we'll find that Laban is very much stuck on himself. He's got a very high opinion of himself. And then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. As we mentioned last week, it doesn't say here that came in a dream. Obviously, God's talking to him somehow, but we will find in further verses that that's exactly how he got that message from God, is a dream. So we'll hear a little bit more about that dream as we move on. Next verses 4 through 9. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. Now, why is he calling Rachel and Leah? Well, he thinks he wants to leave. God's told him to do that. Who's going to be the ones that would be the least wanting to leave? Well, the ones that grew up there, right? His wives, his two main wives. He has 4, but his two main wives, the 2 daughters, or the 2 sisters of Laban from that, or daughters of Laban, I guess. Anyway, he figures they're going to be the ones that will be the most reluctant to leave, and so he wants to explain to them what he's going to do and why he's going to do it. He's going to make his case to them because he fears that they may not be on board with him, and he really wants them to be on board. He wants some consensus. He doesn't want to pick them dragging and screaming. For one thing, he's going to try to sneak out. If they're yelling and screaming about not wanting to go, it's a little hard to sneak away. So he needs to get them on his side from that. So he said to them, I see your father's countenance. I see how he looks. I see how he acts with me, how he talks to me, the tone that he uses with me. And he said, that is not favorable to me as before. But while that's not favorable to me, but the God of my father has been with me. That's not changed. Laban's attitude towards me, that's changed. He used to like me. He used to be happy when I married you. He was happy when I was taking care of his flocks and his herds. Now that's not so much the case. But God's been steadfast throughout this. God has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. I've done everything I could. I've been a good servant to him. I've been a good worker for your father from that. You know that. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, we don't read in Scripture about every time that they changed. We don't know all 10 of those specifically from that. We know, first of all, that he worked for 7 years for whom? For Rachel. Did he get Rachel? No. Laban surprised him and gave him Leah. And then excused it, well, you got to have the older sister. Then he worked another 7 years to get Rachel. Now, he got her right away, but he had to work 7 years to earn that. So 14 years, and he changed the wages on him once there, right? Then we know that when he went out to do the work, and it was Laban's idea, look, you shouldn't just do this for free, so let's figure out your wages from that, and he would determine what of the flock he would get. Remember, we got the speckled and the spotted and the striped and all that kind of stuff to figure out which ones he would get. And he knew that was getting snuck out. He did certain things to help guide along, with God's help, which kinds of animals would be born from that. And he changed between those different types of, or different colorings or distinguishing features of the animals to determine what he would get. All we know is that he did that 9 times. He changed that. He changed once when he did it for the 2 sisters from that. But he says also why he's done that, he's received and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. Remember, that's why the brothers are unhappy. I'm very profitable. I've made a lot. I've gained a lot in my time being here of wealth and all that. God took care of that. God made sure no matter what he did, I came out all right from that. He said, thus, if he said thus, that being Laban, the speckled shall be your wages. Then God made all the flocks bore speckled. It's a correlation of God not allowing him to hurt me. Laban thought that would be stupid and I wouldn't get much out of that, but God made sure that the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streak shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. Laban may try to cheat me on this, but God always made it come out for my favor from that. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given to me. It's not me. Now, like you said, we know that he had some role that he played in that by what he would put out where the right animals, remember the best animals would go to drink water. He would set up certain limbs or whatever in a certain way that, however that would work, under God's plan, helped to get the turnout of the particular type of animal that he was supposed to get for his wages. So he had a role that he played in that, but it still was God doing it, and he's pointing that out. God's done this. It's not me. I didn't cheat him. He made up what the wages were. Guess what? It worked out in my favor. Then he changed what the wages were. Guess what? It worked out in my favor. All because of God. God's behind all those things. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which slept upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. So at least those 3 types, probably back and forth in those 9 times. He'd keep changing which ones would be Jacob's versus would be Laban's from that. And he's saying, I saw in a dream these things going back and forth. Now he's really seeing it in a dream to remind him what had happened and how it had gone. And then he says, and then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. Called out his name. Didn't let him doubt that it was about him directly. And he said, here I am. One of our here I ams. And he said, lift your eyes now and see. All the rams who sleep in the flock are streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I've seen how Laban has mistreated you, how he's tried to take advantage of you. I, God, have seen that. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made the vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. So as I said earlier, when he said, it says that God had told him to go, it came, as we see here, from a dream. That God said, it's time to go. As we briefly talked about last week, it may be very likely that he was reluctant to leave there because in many ways he felt God had sent him there. And it wasn't necessarily his independent decision to go away from there, much like it was later on when he's older. And when his son wanted him to come to Egypt, he was not really, even though he wanted to see his son, he wasn't excited about the idea of leaving what was the promised land. He didn't know that that's what he should do. But we'll find out that God spoke to him again then. So, this is this case that he's now laid before his 2 main wives, the 2 daughters of Laban. I'm going to leave, but you understand why. Your dad hasn't been fair to me, and on the other hand, God has made sure it all worked out in my favor. And so yes, I have a lot of the wealth now, and he's not happy about that, but that's not because I cheated him. If anything, he was trying to cheat me, and oh, by the way, God's told me that we got to rise up and I need to go back to where I fled from before. I need to go back there. So he set up the stage with them. How are they going to accept it or not accept it? Starting in verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Is there anything left in there for us to have? Now think about it. Were they really ever going to get an inheritance, really? Did the law really, there wasn't a law at that time, but the natural order of things at that period of time, did they really have an inheritance? Not really. As we said, it went to the men. It was set up to go that way. We don't see it, really changing from that till we see an adjustment made to it. Those of you who were in my Joshua class, when did we find a change in that? When Zephad's only had daughters, and when they said, wait, you're going to divide up the land and give inheritance, don't blot out our dad's inheritance. He had no sons, let it go to us. And Moses spoke to God, and God said, yeah, if you don't have any sons, it goes to the daughters. Only adjustment he made for women. Everything else fell to men still. So if it wasn't daughters, after that it was a straight male line that went into it. But they really didn't have any inheritance anyway, other than what they got as a dowry or whatever, like they got their maids and stuff like that when they were first married. But that's their point. We're getting an inheritance anyway out of this. We're not getting anything more, so we've got nothing vested in remaining around. And are we not considered strangers by him? I think that's probably a reflection on the fact that while he was showing a different countenance directly to Jacob, that also carried on down to how he interacted with his own daughters from that. If you're unhappy with the son-in-law and feel like he's taking advantage of you, it's kind of hard to be positive and happy and thrilled with your daughters who are benefiting from that and aren't trying to change that. You start to blame them from that. So clearly he's not treating them very well now, even though they're his daughters from that. For he has sold us. And that, in fact, is maybe acceptable in that time period, but that is exactly what he did, right? He sold each one of them for 7 years of labor by Jacob at his command. They were sold just like a slave was, even though they were daughters from that. When you would normally expect, dowry and stuff like that to come the other way more or less, in this case, they were paid for. They were purchased, and they feel that from it apparently. and also completely consumed our money. He's completely used up what we had, meaning, those days that you worked for him, that they got paid on that's gone by the wayside. Why? Partly because God's continued to give all the increase, or most of the increase, to Jacob instead. So what he got, he's flittered away. He's got nothing left of that anyway. So there's not really anything there. The money's gone, even for what we were sold for, if you will, from that. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Bold talk, like I said, because the daughters would not be inheriting it. So I'm not sure how they think that's necessarily theirs that they're getting, but they're going to claim it. I guess from, again, the fact that they don't feel like they should have been sold, that there shouldn't have been an expectation for Jacob of working for them for those 14 years. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. They said, we've got nothing invested in our father and what we've got here. There's nothing left for us here. We're not being treated well by him. We weren't treated well by being sold. We're not being treated as anything other than strangers instead of his children now. So if your God said to go, let's go. Let's do it. Do what he tells you to do from that. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained, and paid to Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Going to return home. Now that means he's got a lot of stuff. He's got all of his kids now with him from that to go back there, or most all of them from that. Doesn't have Benjamin at that point, but he's got the rest of them, 11. And he's got all the stuff that Laban's sons are complaining about taken from his father. So it's not a little group that's sneaking out. It's not, the Sound of Music where they're just, singing their way across the Alps as just a few small family. This is a large group of people that are leaving, and a lot of livestock that's trying to move. They're not going to move with rapid speed, even sneaking away. They're not going to make a lot of ground from that, but that's what he's going to do. And he's headed back, as God directed him, back to the land of Canaan, what will ultimately be the promised land. It has been promised already. Back to Isaac, who he assumes is still alive back there. Maybe he knows somehow or another, but he's going back there from that. Now, where's Laban? Now, Laban had gone to shear his sheep. So he's not around. Good time to leave. Laban's not going to be a problem right now. Nobody else has enough power to necessarily do anything. Probably had most of his sons, if not all of them, with him when he was out shearing the sheep and taking care of his stuff. So, nice time to leave from that. Now we find something interesting. And Rachel had stolen the household idols which were her father's, that were her father's. Now, you may have wondered before, was Laban really a follower, if you will, of God, of what would be called the Israelite God in the future from that? And the answer is not really. Now, it could be that it's a mixture, which is often the case in the Old Testament, where people mixed in and added gods to it, but he had household gods, certainly not something God was in favor of, even though he hadn't put down his commandments at this point. God was never in favor of that. He explained later on that he is a jealous God. So that wouldn't make him happy from that. But they usually had some value to them. They were made out of gold and silver and those kind of things. We don't know why Rachel did it, other than she's really irritated with her father, probably for the same things as have been discussed, and probably still very irritated that she had the expectation and Jacob had the expectation that she was going to marry him, as first. And instead she got stuck in a kind of a rivalry between her and her sister from that. And she's probably a little irritated with him from that. For whatever reason, she steals the household idols. Whether she wants to worship, I don't know what all she's going to do. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian. Notice he's called the Syrian as opposed to the fact he's still related to him. It's more about where he's at from that. And again, a different kind of belief system that he's in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So, like I said, he can't sneak away from camp. He just didn't tell Laban before he left, I'm going to leave. But he didn't sneak out because too much takes to get everybody loaded up and going out there and trying to move the herds. They're going to make noise, and so he didn't sneak away from the people that were there, but he just didn't tell his father-in-law that he was leaving before he went from that. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed towards the mountains of Gilead. So he's fleeing from that aspect from his deal. So we've got the dream now. The dream is that of seen by Jacob. where God talks a little bit about how Laban's not treated him well and tells him to go on. So who had the dream and the vision in this particular case? Well, in this case, Jacob did, a believer. From that, we don't have the Jewish religion per se at this point. That comes after we get to the law with Moses, but we've got that direct tie to God from that. He was sent by God. He's now sent back by God. The situation was that he had been well mistreated by his father-in-law, who he'd been very diligent about taking care of his goods and helping him to prosper to some extent, and yet his father-in-law kept trying to take advantage from him. And it was getting to the point where there was too much jealousy between them, much like we see between Lot and Abraham earlier from that, right? Or later than that. No, earlier than that. And so we have that situation again where there's that jealousy between the different groups from that. So that's what's going on. What was the content of the dream and vision? Well, it was a reminder of what all he'd gone through. It's particularly focused on the change of wages with regards to him being paid to be able to take care of the animals by changing which animals would be his and which ones would be his father-in-law's from that. And then telling him to go on. The purpose of that dream and vision was to number one, most importantly, tell him it's time to go home. It's time to go back to Canaan, time to get back to your family and away from here. Secondarily, to help him build the case for his wives and to talk to Laban later as to why should he do that now, what has gone on to cause the fact that he would leave and he returned to his family instead of staying there from that. How did it figure into God's general plan? Well, God needed him. He's a part of the line of things to get back to the promised land, back to where God had made the promise. So he needs him to go back there instead of being apart and have the story be somewhere else. It needs to go back to the promised land where the whole flow of the story goes. And so this is the time to give that direction to him. Like I said, he's probably reluctant to do it on his own, to go back and get back to Isaac and back to what would be and what is called the promised land, just isn't physically theirs yet. Any other comments about this dream?
Like there's a lot of deceitful people at this point in time in history, because Jacob and Esau started off with a deceitful situation, and somehow Jacob stayed in God's favor to a degree that God cared for him and provided good opportunities. And thinking through this, it just surprised me that, with the dreams he had, that he didn't or wasn't able to successfully share that with Rachel and Leah to where they would understand more about God and the household idols. That they seem to have thought about it like idol worship or luck. And both of them were kind of caught up in the fact that seems to happen with young ladies today, that, I trusted in my father's wealth, but now I have a husband who has a lot of wealth, and his wealth is continuing to grow. I don't need to worry about that. So it just seems like a very materialistic kind of mess going on, even though Jacob was, when he get input from God, his heart would succumb to that and follow that input and direction.
Yeah, it has very much been driven by that kind of stuff. It's interesting. Jacob didn't really benefit from his deceit at the end of the day, did he? He didn't get really the birthright very much. He didn't benefit from that he got from his brother from that. And now he's on the other end of things. He's not looking to do things. Laban comes to him and tells him, maybe you should earn a wage here. He didn't go, hey, can I make some money and I'll have God help me get a bunch of riches out of this. Laban comes to him and says, well, you shouldn't work for me for free. But Laban thinks, I'll get your labor and I'll still come out ahead. I'm going to work this in my favor from that. So there's a lot of that more from him, and he's now feeling how it must have felt in some ways of Esau being taken advantage of from that. He gets to relate to that part of it too. Mm-hmm.
It just still seems funny. It's kind of, maybe I'm reading into it too much, but it seems like the marriage, because of having to pay for the daughters, is more of a business transaction than a love thing, even though he had the attraction for Rachel at first. But it seems very different, the level of devotion or convenience or wealth. This works out well for now, so I think I'll just roll with it, and not understanding at all that God was influencing Jacob strongly.
Yeah.
that they didn't pick up on that.
And you see more of that, obviously, with the situation with Jacob. Now, if you go back to Isaac and Rebekah, which Laban is also involved in, you don't get that. Ultimately, they leave up to the marriage to Rebekah. They don't force that and say, well, if you give me he brought stuff for them. The servant brought stuff to bring back Rebekah, or whomever fit the bill from that, but it doesn't seem to be quite the transaction from that, and there's a reason, I think, somewhat in that one, more so than there is here, for how that got held with. But for the most part, it's a transaction. Everything's got value to you. And we'll see that Laban is really heavily that way. Even after everything goes on, he's going to talk to Jacob, and part of his discussions with him as we look at his dream and the final parts of this story, because it's a second dream involved, where he talks about everything being his. Everything's mine. Even after he sold his daughter, so to speak, and things have been born and wages been paid and all that, it's all mine. Yeah, God.
Leah was one that Laban wanted to be, she was the first daughter. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why Laban wanted to marry her off. And then Rachel came along, of course. That's what he wanted.
Yeah, I think he wanted her off, not just because she's the oldest, but she was going to be hard to marry off because she couldn't see well. She had a malady that would make it more difficult for her to be perceived as a value, and I don't mean that that's just the way of the world at that point. I mean, it's just like God was that way, right? What could you sacrifice? Well, you can't sacrifice something that's got a problem. And guess what? You can't work in my temple if you've got a problem. So he had a, criteria about those things, and they had a criteria. So I think more than the oldest, he used the oldest as his reasoning for it. But I think he was worried that Rachel was the one I can have go, and I can make more because I can tell he loves her enough, I'll get that other 7 years. But
Wasn't Rachel a little bit blind?
No, it was Leah.
It was Leah?
Leah was blind. Yeah, she had the eyesight problems. And I think that's partly why he did it. We don't know. He said it was because that she was the oldest, but he didn't mention that until after he'd given it to him.
Well, he did in the King James.
It did say that. Said
Yeah.
what? In the King
That's
James.
what I read.
It said what now?
In the King James,
Yeah, the King James. It said what now?
it was talking to,
It
it
said.
wasn't talking about the blindness.
Yeah. Only thing he says about it is at the time he says that that's the tradition. The oldest goes first, and you have to do that. That's the tradition he claimed. He said that was a tradition. That's the only thing we know about that being the tradition. He didn't mention it for 7 years, but we're told now. We only get told that after he marries her off and didn't tell Jacob that was going to be the case from that. But we do.
About her having a veil over her face that he couldn't see.
And I assume there was quite a bit of fruit of the vine taken probably before that ceremony happened, because he didn't figure that out till the next day. So I don't think a veil covered all that for that long, and they look that much alike. So I don't know. That's speculation. We don't know. But it is interesting how all it goes around. It's interesting Jacob's getting back some of what he gave from that. But you do get a very clear picture of, which is not uncommon for, let's face it, for any age, that money is behind a lot of things. And money is behind most of what Laban's doing with his daughters and what he was doing with Jacob. It's all about money, about possessions.
Well, that's interesting because lambs today, of course, it could have been a whole lot different back then. I don't know. I didn't live back then. But lamb, I ain't that old. But they had speckles. Lambs now have speckles on them.
Yeah.
And how that goes in there, I don't know. Maybe they did back then.
Well, they did, apparently. It's just that was not common. And I don't think they're that common now. And that's why Laban originally laid it out with the speckles or the spots or whatever, because he figured we don't get that many of them. That's not that much wages from it. I'll get the ones that don't have that, because that's the exception, not the rule. And God worked it out to where it became the rule for those birthing classes and didn't work in his favor, so he quickly switched to something else and said, well, it's never the striped, so I'm going to go with striped, and God made it that way. So it was in the abnormality from that. All right, let's go on with Laban then. Moving on right from where we left off in Genesis chapter 31, starting in verse 22. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. So Jacob has 3 days lead on him, but he's also got a very large group of people and animals that he's moving. And he, that being Laban, took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey. Now, what are his brethren with him? He's talking about men, right? That's who's out there shearing the sheep and stuff. There may have been some support personnel, but he's really taking men. Who did Jacob take? He took his family, his wives, his kids, a few servants. He's not got anything close to what we might term as some kind of an army or something. Laban is taking men with him. That's the brethren that he's taking along with him. And so he can definitely do something, and that's what his intentions probably are. And so he pursued him for 7 days' journey. So it's 10 days from when Jacob left till Laban catches him. 3 days that Laban didn't know about it, and 7 days it took him to actually catch up with him. But he's able to catch him because, like I said, they're not moving real fast. Just can't with little kids and camels and goats and sheep and those kind of things. And he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban, the Syrian again. Let's make that distinction. God's not really wanting to claim him. He's a Syrian now, even though his bloodline goes right into God's families. In a dream by night, like we have any dreams otherwise. Then we call them visions. And he said to them, and that's all we know about the dream. The only thing we know about the dream are these words that God spoke to him. Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. All right. Hi, Jacob. Things going well? How you been? See that chariot race the other day? That was pretty good, wasn't it? I can't do either one, it sounds like, from that. Now, it's interesting. This is not the first time, Laban's heard those, or he's actually spoken words like that before. So he's familiar with that kind of a scenario to get into. If we go to Genesis chapter 4, verses 48, I don't know, not 24, I don't know where that one ends, but probably 54 maybe. I don't know, we'll see when we pull it up. He sees as limits. It comes in a situation when the servant has been sent by Abraham to get a wife for Isaac. And when they come, and he tells the story of why he should take Rebekah back, then Laban and Laban's mother, Rebekah's mother, are the ones that the servant talks to and asks about taking her with him. And that's what we see this sentence, that kind of thing from before. So we're starting in verse 48, goes through verse 50 is what the latter verse is. And I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord, that being the servant that Abraham sent. He's explaining, and blessed the Lord God of my master Abraham, who had led me in the way of truth to take the daughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, it's actually his master's wife's brother, right? Now, if you will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. So he says, it's up to you. Whether we're going to do this or not do this. I'm not bargaining. I'm not going to pay a price. I brought some gifts to you from that, but now you're going to tell me. And I'm, just like he told Abraham, look what happens if they don't do it. And he says, well, then, your oath that you gave me is off. If they won't come, then you don't have to, you're not being held to accomplishing it from that. You're off of that. And that's kind of what he's saying here. You tell me, what am I going to do? So Laban and Bethuel, that's Rebekah's brother and their mother, answered and said, the thing comes from the Lord. We can speak to you either bad or good. It really should be neither bad nor good. Either good or bad about it. We can't do anything. It's God's word. What are we going to say to that? We're going to speak against God? That wouldn't be a good idea. We're going to act like it's our idea? No, it's God's idea. We can't really speak either way. And so he's had that same situation that God's telling him to be that now when he talks to Jacob. Right? Jacob, who is actually his nephew. Don't say good or bad to him, just like he wasn't supposed to say good or bad about the idea that Jacob's mother was going to leave and go and be the wife of Isaac from that. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob pitched his tent in the mountains, And Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. Both are in the same mountains, obviously. And Laban approaches him, and Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? That you have stolen away, unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword." Now, he may not have said it that way because he didn't want to offend God. He may have said, real nice, "What have you done that you've stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword?" I'm not going to be very accusatory in the way I say this, but I'm going to ask that from that. Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? Why did you do that? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. He didn't say I would, but I might have done that. You never know. Might have been happy about it. No, I've had very good labor. Even though I've been losing stuff, you've been doing a very good job for me. You'll find out how good a job when Jacob defends himself a little bit. But, he's acting like, I don't know, why would you do that and run away from me without letting me know? Well, obviously he knows there's a reason, and he's sure the world knows what that reason is. There's no doubt he understands the mentality on the other side. He said, "And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters." Are they his sons and daughters? No, at best they are his sisters and his nephews and his nieces. We don't know about his nieces, we just know about his nephews from that were born. "Now you have done foolishly in doing. That sounds bad to me. God doesn't strike him down, but that doesn't sound like he's saying something nice to him. You've been foolish. I guess that's better than saying you've been evil or you've been wrong or whatever. You just made a silly mistake. That's what you've done, a silly mistake you shouldn't have done. You should have thought that one better."
That's calling the truth a little bit not true.
Yeah, exactly. It's like white lies versus, black lies, right? It's not quite that bad. Yeah. Dress it up a little bit. "It is in my power to do you harm." Now he's speaking out what? Because he has the right to do it? Well, he feels like he has the right to. Does he really have the right to? I don't know that he has the right to that. Does he have the means by which to do it? Yes. As I mentioned, who did he bring with him? He brought men. Right? He's got his men with him. Could he do something to Jacob and anybody else there? Yes. He has the means there with him because Jacob does not have a force that can meet up with what he has with him. So he has the ability with the resources to do harm from him. But he says, "But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad.'" It's interesting he even told Jacob that. I kind of would have been Jacob and try to taunt him a little bit and see if you can get him to say something bad, just to try him since you know what God said to him. And he will throw it back at Laban to some extent in this discussion. But he's carefully, he gets off of that and tries to take it away from just having anything to do with why he left. And he tries to turn the story really quick. And he goes, "And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. I understand why you might leave. You were getting homesick. You've been here for a good long time. You're homesick. You want to get back to your family and where you're born and everything. I can understand that's probably why you wanted to go out. But why did you steal my gods?" Now, is that really the way he felt? I don't know. That shows you importance he had, again, on his sisters and his nephews, right? I'm really concerned about my household gods. That was bad that you did. I understand that part, but this part, I don't know that I can forgive you for this part. You stole my gods. And what am I going to do now? You've taken those. And I can say part of that's probably because they were value other than just even being gods in and of themselves as he perceived them, but in the fact that they were made from things of value from that. Now, Jacob's going to respond. "And Jacob answered and said to Laban, 'Because I was afraid.'" I'm going to be blunt with you. I was afraid, just like I probably am now, except for what you told me God just said to you. "For I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. It was hard enough for me to get the daughters. Now you might just take them from me, and there's not much I can do. I don't have an army. I don't have my people here to do anything about it, so you could take them from force." And he says, we'll get back to addressing what you really are. "With whomever you find your gods, do not let them live." And clearly, he is not aware, and we'll see that in Scripture, that he does not know that Rachel took those gods. He thinks it's a false charge. He's used to Laban trying to take advantage of him. So he thinks it's just a false charge anyway from that. "And with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours, and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. He says, go ahead. I'm innocent. As far as he knew, he was innocent. You prove that I have something to do with it. If you find it, you kill those people, you do it right here in the front. But everybody's going to see whether it's you or me that's right about this. Who's telling the truth? Did we steal from you? Did we not steal from you? Let everybody that's here, the people you brought with you, my family and my servants, let's see. Like I said, he's doing that more boldly than he should because Rachel did, in fact, steal the gods. He just doesn't know that. She didn't share that with him. And Laban begins his search. And Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the two maids' tents, the two maids of the two sisters, but he did not find them. He did not find the gods. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now, is he going to find him there? No. Now, Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Sounds like a comfortable way to travel. But she would, I don't know how long she had him there. Had she carried him the whole time, knowing he was coming after him at some point? Did she do it while he was there discussing things with Jacob? We don't know when she moved him there. But that's where they are now. And she's been wiser than that. And Laban searched all about the tent, that is Rachel's tent, and did not find him. Why? Because they're not there. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. She's having her period, right? That's when you don't want to touch them. They haven't even got to that point of having a law about that, but they certainly saw that as a negative to deal with, even at this point. So, okay, if that's the problem, I'm not going to go over there. I'm not going to deal with that from that. He'll accept that from her. I couldn't believe that it was his daughters that did it to him. His daughters that did it to him anyway. So, why am I going to go and check that out? And he searched everywhere but where they were, and did not find the household idols. So, didn't prove her innocence, obviously, but Jacob thinks so. And Jacob was angry. From Jacob's perspective, you've looked everywhere. You've made a claim against me. There's no evidence proving you're right, therefore I'm right. And you have, once again, proven how you want to mistreat me. And you want us to do things and speak against me from that. And he rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What have I done? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? What was it that was such a big deal that you had to come running after me? The fact that I was moving? These gods that you claim I have that you cannot find? What is it that made you do that? And although you searched all of my things, guess what? You haven't. He didn't. What part of your household things have you found? Well, none, because Rachel's sitting on them. See, set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. He thinks from speaking very righteously without knowing he's not as righteously set up as he thinks he is. Now, from his perspective, he is. He doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't know anything about what Rachel did and where those household idols are, or that they're even in the presence and haven't gone. But he knows how it's been with Laban, and all he expects is this is another false charge of Laban's. So.
And it's a movie.
And it's a movie?
Yeah. They did find it.
Well, in the movie they found it?
In the movie they found it.
And how did they handle that? Did they let him leave?
They lied about it.
They lied about it after they found it. Somebody else did it. More like the situation that Joseph will face with his brothers, maybe, right? And Jacob was, let's see, no, that's the wrong way. Went back the other way. He says, these 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats, your female sheep and your female goats, have not miscarried their young. Now, is that Jacob's credit? That's God, isn't it? That's not normal for that to happen. Now, he can minimize the situations that causes that, from things like wolves attacking or those kind of things that could cause them to go into stress and miscarry. But whatever, they didn't miscarry the young. And I have not eaten the rams of your flock. I have not taken from the flock to feed myself while I've been out there being their shepherd, being there, taking care of them from that. I didn't eat part of your flock, any of your property from that. That which was torn by beasts, I did not bring that to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand. Not only did I take the load of that, that wasn't even my choice. Laban, you said that comes out of my share if anything happens while I'm out there taking care of them. You didn't say half of it. You said, if something's lost, that's my loss, not your loss from that. You required from my hand whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Didn't matter what time. I wasn't allowed to even have sleep that I need to stay on top of, because if anything happened, I'd be blamed for it and I'd have to pay the price for it. There I was. That's the situation I was in. In the day, the drought consumed me. Didn't have anything to drink, and I tried to get them around to feed them. I had to work to get them to somewhere where they would be able to get water and to eat. And the frost by night. I'm trying to sleep, and it's got a bunch of frost out there. It's cold. And my sleep departed from my eyes. This has been going on how long? Thus I have been in your house 20 years, and I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. 20 years I've been doing this. 20 years I've been out here sleeping, not getting any rest, taking care of the animals and stuff, either for your daughters or for my share of the flocks from that, and you continually change those wages because you're not happy because I'm getting rewarded for what I do. He says, unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that an interesting way to put it? It's the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. We don't know exactly why he said that, except for the fact that, as far as he knew, as far as he was aware, Isaac was still alive, and maybe that's why he referred to it as fear, as the way that Isaac was living, in that awe, that kind of approach to God, that respect for God from that. We don't know, but it's interesting. You don't usually see that. It's usually the God of, father of Abraham, of Isaac, and so on. Jacob later on after he passes is the way it's referred to. But it's kind of interesting. Not really critical, but it's interesting. But that God had been with me. Surely now, if he hadn't been with me, unless he'd been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. If God hadn't been with me, I'd have nothing. I'd had nothing to go out and leave with my family. I wouldn't probably even have a family if God hadn't been with me as far as that goes. But God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and he rebuked you last night. He let you know that you have mistreated me along the way. And I have everything that I have because God looked out for me, not because you were looking out for me, Laban. You're always pushing the buttons on me. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, here's that ego with him, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. Is it? I seem to recall 20 years of labor here, where there was an exchange of wages, at which point it's no longer yours, Laban. But that's not Laban's opinion. All this is still his from that. All you see is mine. It's all mine. I expected you to stay here with me where I was, and it would still just be perceived as mine. You could just think of it as yours, but it really is mine. All the people, all the animals, all that is mine. But what can I do this day to my daughters or to their children whom they have borne? I can't do much, right? I've got the manpower to do it, but God warned me about that. So there's not a whole lot I can do here about it. Nothing I can change about what's happened from that. Now, therefore, come, let us make a covenant, let us make an agreement between you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So let's make a covenant between us. Interesting kind of idea to suddenly act like he's got to make peace, and it's in Jacob's favor from that. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. Those who were with him, not the ones that were with Laban, they gathered stones and they made a heap. Remember, that's what we made a lot of, for those, again, who were in the Joshua class. When we saw things like the taking over of a city, they'd make it into a heap, or the killing of a king, they'd make a heap, a reminder, a memorial, if you will, from that. And they ate there on the heap. That's about the only time we saw it. Dinner on the grounds that day, or dinner on the rocks, anyway. Usually it's something else on rocks, but it's not in this case. More biblical. And Laban called it Jagar Sahadatha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. And therefore its name was called Gilead, also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we're absent from one another, when we're not together. May God watch over what we're doing. And we'll find out what he means from that as he goes on. He says, if you afflict my daughters, if you mistreat my daughters in some way, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, oh, by the way, and my daughters' handmaidens, which they had you take, but I'm not going to mention them. But if you take any more wives, although no man is with us, see, God is a witness between you and me. So he's going to put conditions on him. He made conditions for him to have to buy those wives and them give their deal, but you can't take any more. That will be, I will see that as wrong to do anything that takes advantage of my sisters. I took advantage of you to get my sisters, but you can't do anything that might take advantage of my sisters, even though I did. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. Where did you see Laban making a heap? First rock was put there by Jacob. The rest of the rocks were put there by Jacob's brethren. But in Laban's mind, everything's his. This is the heap I set up. This is there. I placed it here between you and me. Well, I did have the idea anyway of having a covenant, so that's good. That's why it's my heap, I guess. This is a heap. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me, but for a specific reason, for harm. It doesn't say we can't visit, family can't go back and forth. I don't think they did that, but it says they could, but you won't go past it thinking you're going to do any harm. I think it's more self-protective. He sees how God's with Jacob. He probably perceives that it won't take long for Jacob to have more of a force than what Laban has. And so he's setting that up to protect himself more than he's worried about Jacob being protected from that. For the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. So he mentions all people, he talks about it as God from that. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. There it is again. By the fear of his father Isaac. Because again, maybe the difference, Isaac's still alive, or at least he believes him to be alive at that particular time. And so he approaches it different from that and adds in the fear of it, the way he's living his life in respect to him. And Jacob offered a sacrifice on that mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban rose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So we have another dream. Who had the dream and the vision? In this case, Laban. Laban had a dream, a non-believer, very much so. Household gods. Talk about the God of certain people, but it wasn't his God. What was the situation when it occurred? Well, Jacob had run off, fled, not secretly per se, but not where Laban knew about it for 3 days. And Laban pursued him. And so God wanted to make sure that he behaved himself when they got together again. So the content of the dream was very, very brief. It was just a statement from God. Say neither good nor bad, or do neither good nor bad, assumed in there as well, when you meet up with Jacob again. Be neutral in that. And the purpose was really to make sure that Laban didn't do anything that God didn't want to have happen. This is the plan, part of God's plan. So the general plan is Jacob is a key part of God's vision and plan for the direct line that will go down to Christ, and therefore will affect all of us from that. And so he needs Jacob protected. He knows Laban is the kind of person that's taken advantage and certainly could be a danger to Jacob. And so he lets him know, you're going to meet up with him, but you better not touch him. You better behave yourself when you get there. Not your nature to do that, but that's the way you got to be. Any other comments or questions? We've come to the end of today. All right. Next time around, we'll look into Joseph, and we'll look into Joseph as he gets a couple of dreams, makes him a very unpopular man, and then we'll have Joseph interpreting a couple of other people's dreams, non-believers. So we'll have a believer have a couple of dreams, and then we'll have a couple of non-believers that Joseph will help with. No other comments. Appreciate you guys' attention and input. Have a great week.